Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Well, welcome everybody to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. It is a rainy day where I'm at, and we just had the local election here on the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and really all around Alaska, we had some local elections, and it's always a good thing when you get out and vote, whether you're conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican. It's your duty, I feel, to get out and vote, and so I hope that you voted yesterday. And sometimes you can vote early in these local elections. And so the chips will fall today and we'll see what happens. I know in the Mat-Su and Kenai, Fairbanks, and Juneau had local elections. So it'll be interesting to see what happened in those local elections. If you are listening to Must Read Alaska on iTunes or Spotify or iHeartRadio or Pandora, and you like Must Read Alaska, I'd love for you to give us a review, 5-star review. It helps us out. We have our content free for you to listen anytime you want. And so all we ask is that you leave us a review. And if you read our content on mustreadalaska.com and you like it, feel free to donate there on the right-hand side. There's a donate button. And we survive off $5, $10, $100 donations at a time. We're not funded by a big nonprofit conglomerate. We're just out here working day in and day out, trying to make ends meet. So if you do donate, we want to thank you for doing that, because you help keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. And we do have an app as well. I want to remind folks that if you go to the iTunes store, the Android store, just type in Must Read Alaska, and you can find our app right there in the store. It's for free. Just click on download it. And if you have downloaded it and you love it, make sure to give us a 5-star review. We love those reviews. Without further ado, I want to introduce our guest. He is an expert in this field. He has been doing surveys in Alaska probably for the longest time of anybody doing surveys in Alaska. He's the owner of Alaska Survey Research, and he has some interesting poll data that we're going to talk about today. Ivan Moore, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show.
Hey there, John. How are you? It's good to be here.
I'm doing awesome. I'm so happy that you joined us today. And for folks that maybe have not heard of you, they've been living in a rock or in a closet, as I like to say, for the last 30 years. Tell us about how you first started Alaska Survey Research and how long you've been doing it for.
Well, I got into the research business in 1990. I answered a job ad in the newspaper for one of the other research companies in Anchorage, and didn't get that job. Sometimes it's actually a good thing when you don't get a particular job, and that was one of those situations, and went and looked for another one and got picked up. This was in 1990, which was a big gubernatorial year. That was the year that it was it was a great introduction to Alaska politics, because it was the year that Wally Hickel won the governorship when he took off. John Coghill was initially Arliss Sturgielewski's running mate on the Republican ticket, and then he went off with Wally Hickel, and they went off and formed a ticket on the AIP side. And so it was a crazy gubernatorial year, and I was picked up, did some work in that, and then did research for the next 5 years for the other company, and then started up on my own in 96. And people can say a lot of things about me, but I'm still in business 26 years later, 32 years after getting into the business for the first time. So I must be doing something right.
Yeah, you and I both know that in this business, there's going to be people that like you and don't like you. And you've been doing this 26 years.
Fine. I thrive on the tears of my critics.
That's hilarious. I love it. So tell me about, you've probably seen a lot of elections. It's like the wild, wild west, I feel like sometimes here in Alaska. Is there one that sticks out in particular that's maybe been your biggest surprise election of all time, given that you've been doing this here in Alaska for a while?
Yeah, I think that was Tony Knowles against Jim Campbell. That was the subsequent gubernatorial race. when Tony Knowles first got elected in 1994, he served for 2 terms, 1994 through to 2002. And, you know, I know we're going to talk about ranked choice voting later on. And this race was a really good example of, I know that ranked choice voting isn't the favorite thing amongst Republicans and conservatives, but I think the reasonable ones should probably give that a second think. And Tony Knowles getting elected is one of the primo examples of where ranked choice voting would have saved Republicans from a Democrat getting elected in Alaska. That race was really weird. 94 was the Contract with America year with Newt Gingrich nationally. And Knowles, for the last 2 weeks of the election, went further and further and further and further into the lead. And then on election day, it was a dead heat and it blew everyone out of the water. We weren't the only ones who had Knowles winning big. Other research companies also did. And so that was a crazy one. And again, another introduction into politics. That was the year John Coghill, again, was running on the Alaska Independence Party ticket and pulled 13%. And then Tony Knowles and Jim Campbell were neck and neck. And if Coghill hadn't been in the race, Campbell would have won handily, and we never would have had Tony Knowles as governor. So
Isn't that interesting
the
how
whole
that plays
RCV
out?
thing. You know, I know it's not a popular thing because I think the primary criticism that people have is that it threw Lisa Murkowski a lifeline. Whether that was a deliberate reason that it came up, I have no idea, right? Or whether it just so happened, maybe I'm being naive in suggesting that this is a possibility, maybe that it just so happened that Lisa Murkowski was the prime beneficiary, because she would have, of course, had to go through a Republican primary, and she would have had zero chance of winning that.
Yeah.
So,
well, we all know that Lisa Murkowski is a very smart campaigner, and she's oftentimes thinking many years down the road when, while conservatives were arguing about wearing a mask, the other team was deciding elections for the next several cycles. So
right.
Kudos to the other team for thinking down the road, because they oftentimes do, and they outsmarted us, and they get the notch in their belt this time.
Yeah, but it's also, I was quoted just a couple of weeks ago as saying that I truly don't believe that ranked choice voting in and of itself, this process of having, it's also called instant runoff, right? And, if you look at it just objectively, instant runoff is good for Republicans in Alaska, because there's more Republicans voters. There are therefore more Republican candidates. And so Republicans are always much more likely to be going against each other in races and splitting the vote. And ranked choice voting prevents situation. I mean, that Coghill situation in the 1994 gubernatorial race was a classic example of him pulling away a chunk of vote that otherwise would have gone to the Republican. And those kinds of situations are going to happen so much more than Democrats. I mean, shoot, Democrats can barely scare up one candidate in each race, right? Let alone having two. There's not really a functional Green Party anymore to siphon off Democrat votes. So it's always going to happen on the Republican side. RCV, on the whole, will help Republicans more than it'll help Democrats. And anyway, it saves money that you'd otherwise spend on runoffs, and it's good public policy, as my old friend Alan Teshi would have said.
Well, that may be, but it's too darn confusing for the average Joe that lives in the woods like me in Alaska.
Like rocket science, come on.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree on that, but I think that it is a interesting science experiment that I think the legislature will try to get rid of. But
I have no doubt.
Yeah. So tell me about,
enjoy it while it
yeah,
lasts.
yeah, for the folks that voted in, enjoy it while it lasts. My guess is, Ivan, that sometimes, you know, since you've been doing this for a while, you kind of have a gut on how stuff's going to go. How oftentimes does your kind of gut match what the data brings out? And are you surprised quite often, or is it, have you kind of been doing this for a while where you got this thing down to a science?
You know, no, there's no, one of the most fun bits of doing this job, particularly on the political side, but not always. And people incidentally ask me all the time, what do you do when you're not doing political stuff? What do you do when it's not political season, kind of thing? Like, political work is all I do. Political work is probably, if I had to add it up, 20% maybe of the work that I do, because every entity, whether it's local government, state government, whether it's nonprofit organizations, whether it's for-profit businesses, corporations, whether it's interest groups of one sort or another, are always looking to find out what people think about stuff, what they want. I mean, shoot, just as an example, pulling it out of my hat, I've been in this business so long that I once did a survey 30 years ago for ATU. And of course, people who are relatively recent arrivals to Alaska will have no idea what ATU was, but suffice to say, it's Alaska Communications in a couple of previous iterations. It was the Anchorage Telephone Utility, which is a public utility that provided local service. And we did a survey where I asked people their level of interest in a new service coming up called Caller ID, right? It didn't exist
Nice.
at the time. And of course, ATU wanted to find out if people were willing to pay money to find out who was calling them. Of course, now that's completely moot. It's like having a rotary dial phone, for crying out loud. Yeah, everyone, all organizations. I mean, just look around you, all the stuff that you see around you, that happens around you, has at its genesis some kind of research. People don't just pull things out of their behinds and put money behind them without knowing first whether the public wants it, whether there's a market for it, and so on. So yeah, it's important work. And, you know, I got to put a pitch in here, because there's a big tendency for people to not want to participate in research anymore, particularly on the conservative right. And I'll tell you, you know, I mean, another example, just recently looking at doing some research on the ferry system, okay? When it comes to particularly public policy research, but any kind of research, when you get called or you get texted or you get invited to participate in a survey, there is no better way to have an impact on the world around you than to participate in that. Because you're giving your opinion, and somewhere on the other side, there's someone who's listening to that opinion and the opinion of 400, 500, 600, 1,000 other people, right? You have even more impact on policy decisions that way, doing a survey, than you do voting. No joke. Like someone sitting there in Cordova and their phone rings and it's a survey where people are asking about the ferry system. Yeah, you should take a few minutes and give their opinion. Trust me, right?
So recently you had a pretty huge spread in Politico, which I think anytime we can shed light on Alaska politics in the, you know, outside of our big state here in Alaska, can be a good thing. So talk to us a little bit about that big spread. I mean, Politico is a huge publication. Tell us a little bit about how that went and what were some of the main points that were in that article.
It was actually funny, you know, bless Sarah Palin. She sure brings attention to our little area of the country up here. And since the attention since you got into the race for Congress. I've been called I'm doing an interview on Monday with a Swedish newspaper, for crying out loud.
Nice.
I was talking to an old friend of mine back in England just a few weeks ago, and he said he was drinking his coffee in the morning and reading The Guardian, and there was an article that I was quoted in, and he thought to himself, boy, it's a small world. And it is. So thank you, Sarah Palin, for bringing all this attention. It's not necessarily always good attention, but, there's even bad press is good press. Anyway, the Politico thing was weird because it came about. I get called by reporters, and 99% of the time, they just want to talk to you. It's background. They're looking for a quote on a particular angle to a story that they're writing, and they want to have a quote from you in there. And you'll end up talking to them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and they'll pull something out of that. If you get good from the perspective of the person being interviewed at it, you can actually get better at giving them the quote that they'll use, kind of thing, as opposed to it just being random as to what they pick out. But this interview with Ben Jacobs, I didn't actually twig that it was what they call a Q&A, right? That basically the whole conversation with him was going to make the whole piece.
Yeah,
right?
the whole, it's like a 2,000 word piece.
Yeah, so I talked to him for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long it was, long conversation. And then at the end I said, so what's your angle? What's the story you're writing? And he said, oh, it's a Q&A. This is it. And I went, oh, shoot, what did I say? Kind of thing. So it was fun. It was good.
Nice. So tell us your thoughts on ranked choice voting. I know that we touched on it a little bit, but I think it's important. Like you said, myself, conservatives, we tend to not like ranked choice voting. We have our reasons, but I think it's important to hear from the other side, because oftentimes we forget that there's a human element behind people and their thoughts and their decisions and their choices, and we sometimes go to, right away to attacking somebody instead of just hearing them out. So tell me your thoughts on ranked choice voting, and then we'll get into the three major elections, which I think will be fun for folks to hear about.
Well, everyone has had an opportunity, at least the people that voted on August 16th, has had an opportunity to try it out. And obviously the last few surveys that we've been doing, we've been kind of modeling our survey questions on kind of a ranked choice approach, is just instead of asking kind of like a head-to-head. I don't think we really need to kind of get in the weeds about how and why ranked choice voting might be good for one side. Like I said, I don't think it is. I think we just have to look at Alaska history. And we mentioned the 94 governor's race. And for those who weren't around at the time, like I said, it was Tony Knowles, who was the clear Democrat nominee. Jim Campbell, kind of pro-business, he owned Spenard Builders Supply. And he ended up winning the Republican nomination. And then Jack Coghill, I think I said John Coghill earlier, I'm sorry. Jack Coghill was running on the Alaska Independence Party ticket. And Knowles and Campbell ended up neck and neck, with basically Knowles winning by 500 votes, and Campbell and Coghill got 13%. That 13%, if it had been in a ranked choice scenario, it basically would have been Knowles and Campbell and Coghill and whoever else the fourth one would have been. When Coghill got eliminated, it would have gone 90% to Jim Campbell. I mean, absolutely no doubt about it. And we wouldn't have had a Governor Knowles in 1994. We go forward 4 years to 1998, and Knowles is running for re-election. And this was another example of why ranked choice is good. That year, Lindauer was the highest in the primary. He won the Republican nomination. And again, absolutely typical loads of Republicans in there. The other ones were Robin Taylor, who was from Southeast Ketchikan, I think, and Wayne Anthony Ross was the third one. And if I remember rightly, Lindauer got about 22%, and then Ross and Taylor got like 13% each. And Knowles was the only Democrat, right? And he wasn't the only Democrat.
So he won
was
by
the
a
only credible
landslide.
Democrat. So if ranked choice voting had been in effect that year, instead of it going to the general and basically being Knowles and Lindauer, and anyone who was around back then know exactly how that one went when it got to October and Lindauer completely cratered as being a liar and a fraud, talking about radio station mirrors and God knows what else. And Knowles ended up winning by 40 points, whatever it was, because the guy was legitimately insane. I shouldn't say that. Allegedly insane, right?
Man, I wish I was around for
if
that
it had
one.
been
That would have
ranked
been fun.
choice, right? It would have been Knowles, Lindauer, Taylor, and Ross going through to the final. Democrat and 3 Republicans. And then when Lindauer craters, there's 2 others to step in, right? And so how is that like, if Knowles, which he wouldn't have, had gotten elected in 1994, this would be a completely moot point. But given that he got elected, if RCV had been there, he wouldn't have got reelected, because very probably Robin Taylor or Wayne Anthony Ross would have made a better ideological choice for Alaskans in '98. Another example was the year that Begich got elected to the US Senate. And this is a less clear-cut example, but it's another example. Of course, he was running against Stevens. Stevens very comfortably won the Republican primary. Dave Cuddy was running against him, owner of family that owns First National Bank. So had buckets of money, not as much charisma, didn't really catch fire at all in the primary. And then Vic Vickers was another one who was largely self-financed. He didn't end up with very many votes, but probably would have been the 4th, okay? So that year, Stevens and Begich went to the general, and then 7 days before the general election, Stevens is indicted, right? And let's be clear, that's why Begich was elected in 2008, because that knocked Stevens down enough that Begich won. And I'm not suggesting that if RCV had been in place in 2008, that the result would have been any different. But again, if someone gets indicted with a week to go before the general in an RCV situation, there's an opportunity for the voters to have another choice instead of being stuck with the one that they selected back in August. So I don't know. I mean, just look at past situations. I think it's a good thing. And I don't think, even though, like I said, people are bent out of shape, I think the thing that people are bent out of shape on the right about is the fact that the Republican primary is gone, more than it is actually ranked choice voting that they're objecting to. It's because the Republican primary is no more. But I think the Republican primary has been a bad thing for the right wing, right? I think what we're seeing in the numbers, particularly with candidates like Kelly Tshibaka and Sarah Palin, is that they're super popular on the conservative right amongst the 25-30%, because those 25-30% have been used over the last 20 years of voting in this little bubble where we just need to like the people as long as we like them in our little 25% bubble on the right. But you look at Tshibaka and Palin's numbers, as soon as you get out of the conservatives, it drops off a cliff. It really does. And what it takes to win, particularly statewide races in Alaska, is popularity going further across the middle. As we know, Alaska has a big
We've got the biggest middle of any state, I think, percentage wise.
And I'm telling you, Peltola does that, and Begich also does that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Senate race. Tell folks what your, I'm sure you've been doing, polls all summer, but tell folks what this latest poll that you did says about the Senate race. Kind of give us some insights on the data that you've, this newest set of data. I think it'll be interesting for folks to hear.
It has Murkowski and Tshibaka and Pat Chesbrough, the Democrat, and the infamous Buzz Kelly in the final.
That's so hilarious to me.
And anyway, suffice to say, Buzz Kelly gets eliminated first, and it doesn't really matter where his votes go. And then Chesbrough is eliminated second, and nearly all her votes go to Murkowski. And the one thing we can say for certain right now, as we approach the general in November, is that it will go to a Murkowski-Tshibaka final. And this particular one was like 57-43 to Murkowski. I have polled the race probably 5 times in total going back to last year, and Murkowski has won every single one, and it's ranged from like a smaller lead than that, 52-48, 53-47 kind of ballpark, up to 57-43, 58-42. So I see Murkowski as a pretty strong favorite. It's not completely impossible that Tshibaka might win. On Predict It right now, which is one of my favorite kind of go-to sites for getting a pulse on reality, because people are actually putting their money behind who they think will win. Murkowski right now is an 80% favorite, right? So Tshibaka's 20%. It's a 1 in 5 that she could win. She could win. Don't get me wrong, but she's the underdog.
Yeah. Have you polled any of like Murkowski's, things that people like about her and things that people like about Tshibaka? Do you go that deep with your questions, or do you just stick to who you're voting for?
We haven't lately, but I mean, suffice to say that Murkowski gradually since 2010, which is when she lost to Joe Miller in the primary and ran her write-in and ended up winning, has gradually moved to where she is now, which is basically a pariah, let's face it, amongst the people on the right. For the longest time, her main support came from the middle. And if you looked at her popularity kind of going from the left to the right, it went up, and it was most popular amongst moderates and no party people, and then it came down. She was somewhat mistrusted on the conservative right. She was somewhat mistrusted on the liberal left, and she was most popular in the middle. And then 2017 came, which was the skinny Obamacare repeal. That was the one where John McCain went out on the Senate floor and gave the thumbs down, and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were the 2 Republican votes with McCain that basically, that was the repeal of Obamacare, and it failed then. That was it as far as the conservative right was concerned. So yeah, we could ask her, why are you negative to Lisa Murkowski? And we'd get all sorts of invective. But that's really when it went to the point where she is, like, if you showed me her numbers cross-tabbed by party affiliation and cross-tabbed by political ideology, but her name was covered up, I'd say that's a Democrat. That is 100% a Democrat. Who is it? Oh, Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, the one of the funny things that I remember seeing that I took a screenshot of a couple years ago, it may have been more than a couple years ago, the official Facebook page of the Democrat Party for Alaska put out a thing because of one of Lisa Murkowski's votes that says, they literally said, "Never again will we partner with Lisa Murkowski. We're the only reason why you won. last time, and we will never put our faith in you again, paraphrasing. And obviously they've forgotten about that, because my guess is she's getting a lot of the Democrat votes.
Well, like I said, now if you look at her numbers, it's not a hump anymore with the highest in the middle. It's a lowest on the right, middle in the middle, and then highest on the left. So she categorically looks like that. And she's going to have trouble maintaining that. And I'll tell you why. Before, when she had a hump, all she had to do to keep the right happy was occasionally toss a bit of red meat over there. And then next time she'd toss a little bit of red meat over on the left to keep them happy. And the people in the middle didn't mind so much. And so there was a certain stability and equilibrium to her situation. Now she's like this. She can't really do that. Every time she tosses something over to the right, they're not going to do it, and they're going to say, "I'm sorry, it doesn't make any difference," and they're going to be as negative to her as they ever were. And the people on the left will only get upset. It's like you've got to obey your master, and she's going to have a tough time.
Yeah, she's worked herself into a bit of a corner.
Keeping her support base happy, and at the same time not becoming a pariah within her caucus in the Senate.
So let's chat about the governor's race. You have some interesting numbers there as well. I think that for a lot of folks, this is a very peculiar race, because you have Walker back in it.
Mm-hmm.
You have a candidate, Les Guerra, who actually will be on the show tomorrow, my Must Read Alaska show tomorrow. That is, he is one of the, from the last that I can remember, a top running candidate from the Democrat side that's very vocal about his pro-abortion, those kinds of things stance in all of his ads. And, it's just a very interesting race. And then you have Governor Dunleavy, who, for a lot of folks, maybe he hasn't been their conservative hero, but they're going to vote for him regardless. And then you got former Mayor Pierce that's pulling up the 5, 6, 7% that's maybe disenfranchised with Governor Dunleavy. So tell us a little bit about this particular race. It seems like Governor Dunleavy's got this thing in the bag regardless of what happens, but tell us about what the data says.
Well, again, it's not a slam dunk, but yeah, he's in a very strong position. Going back to the primary on August 16th, we saw how things look in that race, which was basically Dunleavy with just over 40%, and then Walker and Gara kind of in this tussle for second and third. Of course, it didn't matter then which one came second and which one came third, because this was just the pick one primary, right? And then, as you say, Charlie Pierce was the fourth candidate to make it into the final. Okay, so the most significant change since the primary that we've seen in the polls, and also in the Fabrizio poll for the AARP that was done 2 or 3 weeks before my one, is that Gara appears to have gone out in front ahead of Bill Walker for second place, because obviously that's key. Charlie Pierce, as you say, mopping up the disaffected Republican vote. He's going to be eliminated first. Most of his vote will go to Dunleavy. It'll be interesting to see whether Dunleavy manages to get 50% when that vote disappears, when that vote gets reapportioned. I don't think he will, because I think he'll probably be on 47, 48. And it'll be kind of a bit of a nail biter, because then it's Gara, Walker, and they're 90% feeding from the same pool of voters, right? And it's a matter of which one comes second, which one comes third. And right now it looks like Gara's got the advantage in getting that second place vote. And Walker say what you want about him. What he's suffering from right now is the penalty of being an independent and not having party loyalty behind him. Because if you look at registered Democrats, 75% of them are putting Gara ahead of Walker. Only 25% are putting Walker ahead of Gara. So that's where Les Gara is pulling away. He's getting the party vote. And it's the same thing when you go back to, remember when we had the big 48 candidate race for Congress?
Oh, gosh.
The two people who I thought would have been really interesting candidates to have gotten into the final four were Andrew Halcrow and Jeff Lowenfels, right? And both of them are like, Jeff Lowenfels like isn't a politician at all, and so he's by definition independent. And Andrew's always been, he's officially Republican, but he's always been kind of independent in his approach to things. Both way underperformed because they're independents, right? It's like really difficult to run.
Well, and they didn't have the name Santa Claus as well. So.
Right, exactly. But you saw like all the Democrats were agonizing. Oh my God, who do we vote for? Mary Peltola, Chris Constant, like, and the Republicans were all agonizing about their choices as to which Republicans they wanted to get in. And Andrew Halcrow and Jeff Lowenfels were both going, how about us? And it's like,
okay, so I got a little bit of in the weeds question on the governor race for you, if you have any thoughts or data. So does Walker coming in third place, do you think that actually benefits Dunleavy because Walker is most likely to have more people vote maybe Dunleavy third than, probably folks on the Gara side are probably not even going to rank Dunleavy.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, really what it comes down to is who matches up against Dunleavy better. And that has always been, is, and always will be Walker, right? Yeah. You put Les Gara against Dunleavy in a final and everyone's like, bang, it's all kind of completely done and dusted. With Walker, it's different. One little data point that I remember is that on the first ballot, Les Gara gets 1% of the conservative vote, which is like 35% of the population. He gets 1%. Walker gets 7%.
Wow.
Right? And so that's an example. And you'd see the same dynamic amongst the moderates, that Walker goes better across the spectrum, does better in the moderates, better in the Republicans, but Les is cleaning up on the amongst the registered Democrats to the point that he will likely come second at this point, right? But the dilemma for the Democrats is, do we go with our ideological preference here, or do we go with the person who, by all indications, is more likely to win and beat Dunleavy? It's the same dynamic that we've got with the Palin-Begich-Peltola race, right? Peltola right now is the favorite. And the question for Republicans is, do we vote with our ideological preference here, Sarah Palin, or do we vote for the person who's more likely to win if they get into the final, Begich?
And so what does your data tell us on that? I think this is probably the race that's getting, I just live out in the woods in Nikiski, but this is probably the race that's getting the most amount of talk just among normal everyday folks. Tell us what your data is saying on this race. I think it's such a interesting race because I think Peltola polled at I think she got like 10% of the vote or something at first, way back in the first.
Yeah, something like that.
And now she's our acting U.S.
Now she's
Congresswoman.
acting, and she has a fearsome momentum wave going here. Like these days, when you poll political candidates and their popularity, it's very rare, given the partisanship that has crept hasn't crept, it's smashed smashed into politics. It's very rare these days to see a candidate who is not underwater or very close to it. Underwater meaning disliked by more people than they're liked by, right? Peltola is a 2-to-1, liked over disliked. I'm not exact on this, but her positive negative, I think, was 52-27. And out of that 52 positive, 34% of it is very positive. Like, people really like her. Now, a certain amount of that is not so much artificial, but temporary, in the sense that she's
it's a honeymoon.
It's a honeymoon. It
Yeah.
will crest, and then it's all downhill from there, right? It's just a matter of where the crest is and how steep the downhill is on the other side. But right now, she's the favorite to get reelected again. It's kind of the answer to the questions that people were asking prior to the primary, which is the result we get in November likely to be the same as the result in the primary? And, you know, it's proving that in Peltola's case, yes, it is. And again, what I was saying about the Gara Walker dynamic is the same. Every poll I've done, Sarah Palin is less likely to win getting in the final two against Peltola than Begich is, because, like I was describing earlier, she's loved amongst conservative Republicans. She's loved amongst conservative no parties. Once she's into the moderates, it drops off sharply. Nick Begich goes much more successfully across, not quite so loved on the conservative right. Certain amount of suspicion in the Begich name, right? Took a little bit of getting used to that. You know, conservatives voting for a Begich makes me laugh anyway. But he does come across the middle very much more effectively, and that's what it takes. And that, like I said, is the thing that I think after 20 years of closed Republican primaries, you guys have kind of gotten used to, I shouldn't say you guys, I should say the conservative right has gotten used to electing nominees out of this bubble. And you've got to consider the other 70%, you know, and how well people go across. Anyway, I could go on all day, but I think we're running out of time.
Well, I appreciate it, Ivan. So my last question to you is this. Tell us about, I'm sure there's folks that are listening here that are wanting to check out more of your info. Where can somebody find your, you know, website? Where can somebody sign up for a newsletter? Where do you publish your survey results? Tell us all about that.
You know, actually, my website is alaskasurveyresearch.com, and a lot of contacts from people come in through there. My email is ivan@alaskasurveyresearch.com, and I've become a bit of a Twitter hound. I actually asked a question on a survey I just did saying, if all social media was going to get banned except for one, which one would you keep? And I would definitely keep Twitter, even though Alaskans on the whole didn't agree with me.
What was the one they picked?
They thought there was more value in YouTube. I look at
Oh,
YouTube and I actually don't count that as a social media. It was like YouTube #1, Facebook #2. But I do actually kind of like the idea of a world without Facebook. But that's a topic for a whole other show. And so, yeah, just, you know, people that use Twitter.
They can find you. What's your handle at Twitter?
It's Ivan Moore 1. I signed up sufficiently early that I managed to get Ivan Moore 1 as opposed to a kind of larger number.
Nice. Well, Ivan, I appreciate you joining us here on the Must Read Alaska show. And I just want to remind folks that, you know, folks from different walks of life can have conversations, and
Sure.
you know, they can be respectful of each other's opinions. I am a conservative Republican and Ivan may not be, but we can still sit together and have a conversation with each other and not agree on things, but still hear each other out. And so that's I think an important piece that's missing today in politics is that the sides are not willing just to sit down and hear each other out. So Ivan, I appreciate you joining us on the Must Read Alaska show.
A lot of fun. Thanks, John.
Yep, and you're welcome back anytime. And for folks that are listening, you can get our podcast at iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere there's a podcast, you can download our episode. And tomorrow I'm going to have Les Gare on, and so you're not going to want to miss that. That'll be interesting. But later on today, I'm going to have the chancellor of the Catholic school in Anchorage on, I think at 3:30. So that'll be a fun show as well. So until next time, I'm John Quick from Somewhere in Alaska. Thanks so much.